Hello, my name is Wildstag, and thank you for tuning in to another used book rant. Today I'm going to be covering this book, The Ranger of Marzanna. Um, this is by an author named John Scovron. It's part of a trilogy titled The Goddess War. This is book one in that trilogy. The first edition was published in April 2020. I don't know which printing this is. The cover design is by Lisa Marie Pompilio and the cover illustration by Magali Villanueve. The map that comes with this book is mediocre in my mind. I'm not a fan of singular landmass with minimal nations on it. And there's also no scale presented. So there are multiple nations on it, but the empire covers the entire continent. And genuinely speaking, that's not how empires work. Very few have ever truly conquered the entire known world. And this only shows that continent. It doesn't show the rest of the world. So I'm not a fan of that style of map. The book is 450 pages, and I read it last year, really about a year ago, when I was on a trip with my girlfriend to the east coast of the US. And it was a pretty fun trip, and this book was probably the least enjoyable part of that trip. And I say that because, and I feel like I'm going to come off as a broken record, but the main character of this book is really boring while ostensibly a powerful character. So in this setting, it's a setting of colonialism and fighting against a more powerful empire, and more specifically, the main characters are siblings. One, the older sister, and the other, the younger brother. The parents were members of nobility within the oppressed nation and were able to maintain some degree of wealth and power due to working with the empire. And the older sister, the older sibling, does not like that her homeland's culture is being oppressed by the empire. The younger brother sees a lot of good that the empire allegedly does, and he wants to help steer his conquered nation into a path that may be more beneficial to them, but is still within the context of them being oppressed. The older sister is very immersed in the culture, and she goes out and interacts with the people in the rural parts of the land and speaks the native language, which is being oppressed in her generation. She is also a ranger, and the rangers are a mostly independent kind of druidic force in a weird way. So the rangers are all an independent kind of quasi-military force. They keep the countryside safe for the people of that defeated nation. But the rangers fought in the war, and for the most part were defeated, and according to all known records, all of them were killed. Except it turns out that the patron deity of the Rangers was able to help out at least one of them. What that one ranger did was find a sympathetic lord and was able to remain on the premises as a caretaker, like a someone who manages the land, the property itself, and was able to use that sympathetic lord to funnel resources and help to people that needed it, to get news out to people that were a bit more rebellious on how to avoid capture, so on and so forth. Rangers are capable of a gift from their goddess, in exchange for an aspect of themselves becoming more bestial. And each of them is assigned like an animal that they are akin to in the eyes of that goddess. And the caretaker sacrificed his facial appearance for, I forget which body part he mentions, but basically he is able to hide amongst the empire as a caretaker to this lord. And it is through that role as caretaker that he is able to help bring up the daughter, so that daughter then becomes the only known ranger. And she goes off and starts her service helping out the rural communities that need whatever help they can get. When her mentor dies, she takes up the mantle as that last ranger. The secondary character, the deuteragonist, is her brother, and her brother displays great skill with magic and is groomed for service to the empire because he's kind of expected to and will be conscripted to if he's not eagerly helping the empire. So he is raised that way with the expectation that he will eventually serve the empire and through that help out his homeland. His mother arranges a marriage with a young lady who is sympathetic to the oppressed nation and is the child of one of those lords from that oppressed nation. And the fiance and the mother are both sympathetic towards the oppressed nation. But the more that the fiance tries to influence the younger brother, the more he recoils and is involved more and more with the empire. So there's several plots going on where everyone is trying to either oppress the nation even more so or rise up against the empire. And the two central main characters are very unaware of the manipulation going on around them. And what I think is interesting about that is that usually when you think of a reactive main character, it's usually someone who's not actively doing things. And in this case, both characters are reactive, but the ranger is active, is being very proactive, but is ineffective, and so she's constantly reacting to other things that are happening around her. She's trying to do something and instead has to keep on reacting. Whereas the younger brother ends up serving as a soldier, and thus he is very reactive while thinking that he's doing something proactive. And meanwhile, the various people in their lives are trying to steer them in different directions. The ranger ends up having to sacrifice two of her body parts. I believe she loses her ears and then she also loses her eyes. And her animal that she is associated with is the fox. And so her eyes first turn into the eyes of a fox, and then eventually near the end of the book she has to sacrifice more so that she can gain the power needed to do what she believes she needs to do. And she gains the ears of a fox. And so the people of the countryside recognize her as a ranger of this deity by virtue of the blessings that she has. But the more blessings she takes, the more manipulable she is, because she starts regressing to a more animalistic existence. And she ends up meeting a couple people who are rangers out in the tundra that live in ice shelters and who are not, they only have like one blessing each, but are living very animalistic lives because they're old, they've kind of given up. They still live on as rangers and know how to do so in the wilderness, but aren't confident in their ability to do anything because they're so old, they're almost defeatist, and they can't provide leadership to their people. The main character, she does believe she can provide leadership, but the leadership she ends up providing goes astray, and the reinforcements she gets from the neighboring countries are instead using her to fuel their own invasion of that oppressed nation. So she's basically trading one oppressor for another, but she doesn't know it yet. Meanwhile, the fiancé knows what's going on and is trying to build up her own people such that they can fight off one threat and then the other. So, in reality, it feels like the two siblings aren't really the protagonists so much as they are the agents of change. That the real protagonists are the mother and the fiance, the soon to be daughter-in-law slash sister-in-law slash wife, and that those two are the ones that are really moving things forward. It's an interesting concept. I just don't like the way it's played out in the 450 pages. It feels like neither of them are skilled enough in any way to really be the main characters of this book, and I don't have any interest in seeing how they turn the situation into something good. It's like, on the one hand, the Empire plotline is going on and is detestable, but also the oppressed plotline is going on and it's detestable because she's just trading one overlord for another, and she doesn't even have the wisdom to be able to recognize it because she is so blindly in service to a goddess that doesn't really care about the people so long as she gets the worship that she demands. That kind of goddess is really annoying and boring to me because it's, for the most part, kind of an untouchable villain. There's no real way to combat a deity, at least not from what's been presented to us in the first 450 pages of this trilogy. So, I don't know, it's an interesting book, and it tries to do newer things, but it doesn't do it well enough to keep me hooked. And I am probably going to put this back into the used book system starting with the new year. I don't remember how much I paid for this, but I don't feel like I got my money's worth out of it, whatever it was actually worth at the time. So, yeah, my name is Wild Stag, and thank you for tuning in to another used book rant.